With Caregivers, production costs are covered by a partnership with United Healthcare and the National Foster Parent Association. We receive no federal or state funding and depend on our constituents and viewers to help us achieve our goals to provide support and services that meet identified needs within our mission. We would like to welcome the viewers of Coffee with Caregivers to the family. The National Foster Parent Association offers several membership opportunities for individuals, child placing agencies, and state and local affiliates. You can join today or donate at nfpaonline.org.
Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with Caregivers. It's exciting to have another episode and another incredible guest with us today that I know you're going to truly enjoy. I was thinking about how do I want to introduce this episode. I think that when you hear our guest speak, you're going to realize that she's a person who has been learning from the very beginning and learning to become who she wants to be and who, she feels she's intended to be. And I think that's something that all of us need to keep remembering, regardless of who we are, how old we are, that we have to keep learning in order to keep ourselves fresh and to keep our minds busy and to keep ourselves alert. And so my cup that I selected for today, and I will see if I always have a hard time, is always learning. And I think that's really important for us to embrace that, regardless of where we are in our life, what stage we are, that we're learning. As kids, we're learning, as certainly as adults, we're learning. But as foster parents and kinship caregivers, adoptive parents, we're learning every day because we're learning something new about the children who join our family and what that's going to mean for now and for the future. So, that said, we're going to just move right on into the introduction of our guest because I'm so excited to introduce you to Jamerika Haynes-Lewis. And Jamerika, as you can see, has a crown on her head. There's some trophies behind her. She has her sash on. And so Jamerika was crowned the 2021 USA Ambassador and started her reign this summer. And we're so excited to have you here, Jamerika. Will it be okay if we show a picture of you being crowned?
Yes, that's fine, Irene.
Okay. All right. There. Oh my goodness. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Thank you.
What a wonderful moment for you.
Yes, and it was my birthday. It was
was it really?
Yeah. So it was quite a feeling.
Oh my goodness. That makes it even better. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself? Just those things that kind of initially what you want people to know, and then you'll go into your story.
Yes, definitely. Well, I want to show my cup, Irene.
Yes, ma'am.
And today I'm actually drinking green tea, so I hope I'm not breaking the world with the coffee theme. But I
actually have water in mine, so we're fine. I had my fill of coffee already.
Oh, for sure. So my friend Amanda gave me this cup. It's a Miss to a Mrs. cup. I was actually married last October, and it's coming upon my first year anniversary. And so this cup has a special meaning for me. And so she's a great person. And when she found out I was getting married, she's like, oh, I have to send you a gift. And it was a coffee cup. And so it's my first coffee cup as a married woman. And so it's one of my favorites.
That's wonderful.
Yes. And so I'm from Seattle, Washington. I was born and raised here in the Northwest. And I've been competing in pageants on and off for the last 13 years. And so when I learned about the USA Ambassador pageant, I loved it. They are a charity-driven organization. And as a contestant, you have the opportunity to choose a volunteer platform that's near and dear to you. For me, that was empowering youth in foster care. I spent 13 years of my childhood in Washington State's child welfare system. And obviously that experience had a profound impact on my life. And when I became an adult, I wanted to help other children and families who were going through the system. And so being a part of pageants really led to my journey of becoming an advocate and sharing my story in hopes of eliminating the stigma of being involved with the system, as well as being able to communicate with child welfare professionals like you on what we can do to truly support children and families.
Right. Well, that's outstanding. Yeah, when I was reading a little bit more about you, and they said your platform is a chance to succeed, empowering youth in foster care, and I love that because we want every youth to succeed, right? We want
Yes.
everybody to, and sometimes there's roadblocks, put in the way, not intentionally,
Yeah.
oftentimes with the best of intentions, but they still turn into roadblocks. And, I watched many children as we fostered for 27 years. And last 10 years were all teenagers, and their journeys to exit foster care. And I hate the word age out, right? Because other kids don't age out of the family. No. But they move on, get out on their own or whatever with supports. But oftentimes these kids, if we weren't able to continue to provide that support, they were on their own.
Yeah.
And we're not prepared for that. And even the preparation for adult living courses didn't prepare them for that. And we had those kids come back so often.
Yeah.
So many times because they knew, they could depend on us. And I worry about those youth that don't have that.
Yeah.
That maybe weren't in a family, right? That we're in a group home situation or an institutional situation. And it's really hard to go back because staff change. The same people aren't even there anymore. They don't even know them. And that's just a terrible thing to happen. So I'm really interested in, your story and how it grew, how you approached becoming an adult, and how that worked for you. Did you have support from the community, or just all of that had led you to have such a desire to move forward in a way that you could be impactful to other youth who've been in the system?
For sure, yes. When I went into the system, it was the summer I had turned 5 years old. And the first family I lived with were the Johnsons, and they treated us like their own children. They were actually in their golden years when we moved in, but we didn't care. We were happy to have a mom and dad figure. And I lived with the Johnsons for only 5 years, but their presence in their lives was very impactful for me. I felt like I was somebody. They didn't make me feel less than, nor did they allow me to feel less than just because I was a foster child. And even though I had moved away at the age of 10, I came back when I was 18 because I knew I could go to them for support. So it was having foster parents like the Johnsons. And then, of course, having community members that I met at church, at school, who really just took me under their wing and really just made me feel loved. It wasn't always easy for me. My mother's rights were terminated when I was in the system. And that just completely broke my heart. I wasn't provided more information beyond her rights being terminated, nor did I really receive any proper counseling services and just general emotional support from my current support system on how to deal with that. So I found myself being just very nice and overly compliant because I didn't want to be rejected. I felt, and even as I became a young adult, that if I'm nice to people, then they won't reject me. And of course, things don't work that way, right? But that's how that experience impacted me. And it was because I was able to have mentors that I could open up to. They were able to help me to find someone that I can talk to about that event that I wasn't able to discuss when I was a child because I just didn't have the vocabulary. And there was a lot of shame. And sometimes pain can make us feel shameful and shut down. And it's very difficult to open up, even if you do have the language to express what's happening.
Right. Yeah, a question, did you have siblings that went into care with you or
I
not?
did. I
You
did.
did.
I had a younger sibling who was with me. And, is the case with, many sibling groups, we were split up for a number of reasons. But nonetheless, that was hard on me. You know, some of our audience members today may have heard the term parentified. I was, extremely parentified. And if I'm
Mhm.
being quite honest, I think a benefit of being apart from my sibling was being able to have my own identity again and not be so burdened with such psychological stress at a young age. But of course, I did miss my sibling and the rest of my family. And like I said, there were a lot of unanswered questions that I had. And quite honestly, many of those questions haven't been answered today. But I would say the major difference is that I had the opportunity to express and process my experience with a licensed mental health counselor. And that really
Right.
helped me to move
Right.
forward.
That's great. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's for sure. I mean, um, everybody responds to things in their own way, but
Yeah.
uh, I think by you being trying to never rock the boat,
Yeah.
it let people think, well, she's okay with it all. She doesn't
Yes.
have anything going on in up there, in her head or in her heart, worrying about what's going on and understanding. And uh, that probably helped them decide, you didn't need any professional services or something. So I don't know. But obviously, as you matured, you realized that you needed
Yeah.
to reach out and to help people, help you understand what was happening in your
Yeah.
family.
And the picture you painted, Irene, was so correct because I was a straight A student.
Hmm.
I was a rule follower, whatever may have you. And I ended up really having trouble when I became a teenager. And everyone was like, we just don't understand. And thank God there's been so much more information made available now and so much more research and training around trauma informed care. And so for me as a child, I just felt there was an injustice by not getting the help that I needed or not being taken seriously when I told people I was in emotional pain. They just couldn't see how I could be.
Hmm.
And it took me being an adult to really be able to name my feelings and explain, you know, I feel sad. I feel in pain because, I don't understand why I couldn't go back home to my mom, and then being in the world as a young adult and not being able to make mistakes like my peers. Especially when I was at college, I would see some of my classmates, blow off things or their parents would pay for things. I could not make that mistake. If I was kicked out of school, that meant I lost my housing, I lost the stability that I needed in order
Right.
to complete school and go to work. So I also felt at times under a lot of pressure, and just between those two experiences, it was like I really need to talk to someone, so I'm not feeling so burdened.
Right. Yeah, just from experience, I think that, and like I said, everybody responds differently to things,
Hmm.
but the way you responded, we certainly had youth that responded that way. But
Hmm.
we also had those that then took the other path of acting out,
Yes.
at every turn, making life difficult for them in that way too.
Hmm.
And so how caregivers, and that's part of why we do this program, is to help all of the caregivers out there better understand, the uniqueness and how they have to really pay attention to each child and how they function and look what's going on inside as much as we
Hmm.
can, to make sure that we are meeting their needs, that we're not just looking superficially at the child and thinking, well, the child's fine,
Hmm.
or by looking at the behaviors and saying, well, this child's out of control, I don't
Hmm.
know if we can help this kid, so let's move them. I mean, those sorts of things are so detrimental to the child, and ultimately, I think, to the caregiver family and any other children they have in their family, because it's a loss.
Yeah.
It's a process that's a traumatic again. So,
Yes.
get better understanding of each child that joins the family, and how to best meet their needs, what approaches to use is so important. And certainly you brought up trauma informed care. I mean, I don't think anybody should be doing this kind of, and I'm going to say work, but for foster families, it's volunteerism, as it is for kinship families.
Yeah.
That the commitment has to be to really understand what trauma does and how it can be perceived in each person as it comes out differently. And I know that what we had to do is, boy, we had to bone up on our observation skills, right?
Yes.
We had to watch for the little things, um, because those usually told us what was going to happen next with the child, right? But we had to
Yes.
start to read that child, and it made it so that we could be more effective in helping the children get past and through some of the really tough parts of what they were experiencing. And certainly the grieving of not having their family, the worrying about their parents, their siblings, all of those things, when they lose contact so often. So I know that your platform, you're talking about, how do you help alumni access housing and education and employment, and then having that whole sense of community. Um, do you have specific things that you recommend to agencies and caseworkers and things like that you found helpful to you?
Yes. So when I was on my own, I really relied a lot on the student support services at my college. That was a really big help. I was part of TRIO. I would say for recent alumni care and for young adults who are still in foster care, I would say definitely making sure like social workers, teachers, anyone who happens to have a young person in their life that is in the system, really just building those relationships before recommending those services. Because I think sometimes it's just really easy to just go to a 17 and a half staffing meeting and be like, okay, here's the plan. 6 months out from the time they'll be leaving care, I feel is too late. Those
Right.
relationships should be built right away. I understand there are staff changes, but I feel as though the sooner young people can have relationships with those adults in their lives, I mean, even as young as elementary and middle school, by the time if they do find themselves leaving care, whether they've been adopted or not, really having those relationships will be a more secure foundation than just giving someone a packet with resources, because they're known, they're loved, they're protected, they feel like someone, and they're more likely to be receptive to information coming from an adult they have a relationship with versus someone who has sporadic contact with them and just basically gives them a Bible's worth of information.
Mm-hmm. I had a call yesterday with a federal agency that contacted me wanting to talk about why it was so hard for states and local entities to get kids who've been in foster care to take the money that was allocated because of the COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to help them live their lives better. And they were saying, there might even have to be a bill to extend that because the kids aren't taking the money and we know they need it. And they said, well, we don't understand why. And I said, because a lot of times you're not getting to the kids, right? And the three ladies that met with me were saying, well, why wouldn't that be? And I said, well, because, depending on the experiences these kids have had, the minute they can be out of foster care, they want to run.
Yeah.
They don't want to be told what to do with their lives every day. They don't want somebody looking over their shoulder to see what their behaviors are, right? What they're doing. They don't want somebody telling them you got to report here and you got to report there. And and I said oftentimes they won't leave a contact information, and if they did, it changes and they don't tell anybody what that is. I said it's hard to get to some of these youth. Now, if they've gone on to higher education, those kids are in the system. We I'm calling them kids, but young adults are in the system. But the others are out there trying to become as independent as they can. because they don't want that interference in their life anymore. And they
Yes.
were just flabbergasted at that. And I said, but it's the way it is, depending on their
Yes.
experience and care.
Yeah.
And so it's not surprising to me at all that it's the same way with everything else. Medicaid, till they're 26. Well, but they have to renew that every year, right? So somebody has to be able to get a hold of them to say it's time. And
Yeah.
they don't provide any of their contact information again, because it keeps changing. And so it was kind of like opened a whole new world for these ladies as they were trying to plan, how do we get these benefits out to these kids? So yeah, you're right. 17 and a half given 6 months is not going to do it. And it's never been appropriate. So I'm curious, in Washington State, did y'all have the free tuition program so that you could utilize that to go on to
Yes.
school?
And so, yeah, for young people who have left care, yeah, they do have access to that. In the past, it's been called ETV. So it's education training vouchers. My situation was a little different. And so I didn't receive funding from the state to go to college, but that resource is there. And one thing that I want to touch on is that sometimes, young people, their experience is not just in foster care that impacts them, but in generally how people respond to them, right? So if people find out that they're a foster youth or that they may have come from a low income background, sometimes how people treat them on a regular basis makes them skittish about interacting with institutions, with people they don't know, or they may feel they're put in a position of obligation if someone helps them. And also too, it may not just be money that they even want or need, just not feeling connected to the community, right? And just having a handout just given to you without the community or the foundation of just having a support system. So I think that's why too, young people tend to stay away, even if they're being given a resource. They just haven't had good experiences in their relationships. So they
Right.
shy away.
Well, I know some of what you talk about is that what you were hoping to do is to help remove the stigma of foster care.
Yes.
And I think that's what that plays into perfectly. We've been pushing strength-based language now for, probably 10 years within the foster care system. And so that's when I said a while ago, I really don't like the term aging out, right? Because that's not, why would foster kids age out when other kids don't, right? I mean, it's about how we talk about the people involved in the foster care system. Children aren't placements.
Mm-mm.
They're human beings. They're not a plate to put on the table.
Yeah.
And they're not placements. They join families, right?
Yes.
Families who have a place for them. And just how we describe kids, and we're always saying the foster kids. And I know that many kids want us to say, a child in foster care. And I totally agree with that. If it has to be said at all, right?
Yes.
I mean, it just depends on the situation. And some people do have a need to know and others don't. I just feel so strongly that we've got to continue to use strength-based language as we talk about the people in this that are in the system, the activities that occur in the system, because we can talk about all of these things in very positive, very respectful ways. But right now we're not. We're still using language that is it hurts, and it's disrespectful, derogatory sometimes. And so I know I may have used this before, but I had a young man, I think he was 11, brought to our home, and we had agreed that we were going to have him join our family. And it was his first. We didn't have a pre-placement visit. It was going to be the worker didn't have time. And when the worker walked into the house, she said, well, here he is. Your placement's here. Just like that.
Yeah.
My husband and I are standing there appalled, first of all. She didn't introduce him. She said, your placement is here. This young man, I knew I was going to love this little fella. The minute he said it, he looked up at her and he said, I'm not a placement. I'm not a plate you put on a table. I'm a kid, and my name is. And he turned around to us and he offered his hand. And we shook his hand and said, we're happy to meet you.
Yeah.
And we're here for you as long as you need us.
Yeah.
But, you know, why would you treat a child that way? How totally disrespectful was that? I mean, now I never had a child speak up for himself at that age that well before. And but he, you know, he had spunk, and he's actually doing really, really well as an adult. And you know, I knew he would. I mean, he just wasn't going to let anybody get him down. And but I always think back to that experience and think, how many times does that happen across the country? That kind of disrespect.
Yeah. And the child having to defend themselves in such an adult way, you know,
Yes.
I think that's terrible that youth and care, they basically be, you know, the adultification, having to advocate and speak up for yourselves. And I feel that sometimes it can be looked upon as being precocious, but it's not.
No.
And I think that's what young people in foster care want to know, is that someone has their back, that someone will speak up for them. They don't always have to speak up for themselves.
Right. Right. I think you're
what's
right.
wrong. Being the only person to say that's not wrong. That, you know, that's wrong. That's not right.
That's right. Yeah, well, it was an eye opener for me, you know, and another experience. A worker came out, and I mean, this child had been on his caseload for almost a year already, and he came to the house and he said, he looked at this boy and he said, "What's your name?" I'm like, "Well, you're here every month to visit him, and you can't remember his name? Look at your notes before you walk in here if you don't think you remember the child's name, but you don't walk in here and say, what's your name?"
Yeah.
I mean, those things just shouldn't be happening ever to any child.
Yes.
And so when I see people who do what you are doing, who are really standing up for something, even when it's hard, right? It makes me smile, makes my heart smile. And I know that sometimes this is going to be, what you're doing is lots of fun, but I know it can also be probably a lot of work. I'd have butterflies in my stomach probably every single time I had to get up and speak. You know, how are you handling some of that stuff?
Well, for me, I've been speaking forever. You know, I started off speaking when I started doing pageants, which got me into the advocacy work. So then my background's in communications. I went to school to be a news reporter, excuse me. And that just turned into motivational speaking, which was something that I always wanted to do. So even from the time when I was a child, I knew that I would be doing something that involved communicating to people from a stage. So that's something that I feel comfortable with, something that I've always wanted to do, and just have been very fortunate to have the chance just to gain that experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So have you, I know you participated in a Walk Me Home event in Washington State that was hosted by their state foster parent association. And I've worked with the Cantfields and some of those folks for years. I've known them for many years, wonderful people, and really a good organization they have. So, so how did you help host that? What did you do?
Yes. Well, when I was younger, the Johnsons, Mrs. Johnson, namely, she would take us to a lot of the FPAWS events. And so when I was out speaking at a community event, Mike Canfield, who you mentioned, he saw me and he was like, "Oh, I remember your foster mom." And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome." And he's like, "Oh, come speak at our state convention." And so I've been involved with him now for a couple of years. And so when I went to this year's Walk Me Home event, I had a booth and I had on my crown and sash, and I told some of the kids that I used to be in foster care. And now I help other, children and young adults who are in the system. And it was a good time. They had a walk. They had different tables with vendors, and it was held down in Tacoma, which is one of our major cities here in Washington State. And so it was a good time.
Yeah. Yeah, we have other states that do that as well. They take the Walk Home event and to raise awareness of, what's going on in foster care, and certainly awareness of the need for more families to step up and step, forward to foster. So one of the other things that I saw is somebody said to you, why don't you move on with your life and forget about foster care? What do you think prompted that?
It's the stigma. I firmly believe that no family expects the bottom of their life to fall out. And just through that sentiment alone, people know that could happen to them. And that scares people. It's like death. Whenever, especially in American culture, we don't do a really good job dealing with death. And it's one of those subjects where people, they want to stay away from it because it feels icky. It feels bad. It feels being out of control. And it's the same thing, in a different context, going through foster care, your life falling apart and not being in control, and feeling shame for not being able to, not knowing how to navigate through a crisis, or by virtue of being in a crisis, right? I feel there's this sentiment that bad things shouldn't happen, or they're not supposed to happen to good people, right? And we all see ourselves as good people. And so I think people want to stay away from that. And I feel a way to eliminate the stigma around foster care is to talk about how and why families end up in the system. It could be a lack of support, not being able to find a job. It could be going through a crisis and it's just really bad. And if we don't talk about those things on how to support families day to day, when crisis does happen, it's just not good. People don't have the support to navigate through it, nor do they feel like they have the hope that things will get better. And so I think a few major ways of eliminating that stigma is talking about the troubles that families can run into, supporting them in preventing those things from happening. And then when crisis does happen, pitching in and helping. And I think what makes it harder for those who go through care is, things like substance abuse, mental illness. Those things are very stigmatized. Even neglect, if someone is impoverished and they don't have the means to provide for their children, they have to deal with the stigma of being poor. So there's a lot of things that just really cause that stigma. And I think a symptom of that stigma is just not wanting to think about it, distancing oneself. And I don't think
that's a good take on it. I do. Family First Prevention Services Act goes full blown across the USA on October 1. Yeah. So, there's there's a good piece of legislation that really is looking at how to better meet the needs of families early on, and to hopefully stop children being separated from their families because of poverty issues. We've got to find a way to help people through those types of needs, because when you look at the definition of abuse and neglect, and they throw those kids those parents into the neglect situation, well, there's willful neglect, and then there's poverty. And if it's willful neglect, well, then there's there's probably some abuse going on there too, right? Because they're willfully creating neglect. But for so many of the kids that come into care, and especially in some states, it's higher numbers than others.
Mm-hmm.
But our children that really are there because of true poverty issues, and nobody's really gone in there to try to address that one or two things that might make the difference, right?
Yeah.
I think there's some hope.
Yes.
I really do. As this implementation of this bill and new bills and new legislation that'll come because of it, because we're going to learn all through this implementation period of what we need to do in addition, that might need some kind of legislative authorization. But I'm really feeling hopeful.
Yeah.
That maybe this will eliminate children whose situations in their family really is poverty related, that they won't ever have to go through this separation and the trauma of foster care.
Yes, and I completely agree. And I do believe, anytime a case comes into the system, it really should be looked at on a case by case basis. There are children who do need the system, whether their parents are no longer living and there's no one else to take the child in. If there is true abuse where the child's life, could be harmed, fatally. And so I think it's important to just really use good judgment. And that's why families, I feel, should be connected to the community. Just the cost of living just keeps going up and up. And I feel that it's causing families to be further in isolation. I know with the pandemic, that has been the case. And I think it's just really important that we look at ways in which we can prevent families having to go into the system, as well as giving them tangible support.
I agree. Well, Jamerika, I want to tell you how much I appreciate you being my guest today. It looks like our time is up.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have any closing words that you'd like to share before we say goodbye?
Yes, well, I just want to say thank you, Irene, for having me on, and just, thank you to all the families who do the work that they do to help children and their families, especially as they're going through a tough time. And any child or young adult who's been impacted by foster care, know that you are worthy of your life's dreams and goals, whatever that they may be, and that you are loved, by someone, and that not to give up, that's what I would say.
That's perfect. What a perfect way to end this segment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. See you next week.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with our friends at United Healthcare. For more information about United Healthcare, please visit www.uhc.com.